Good morning and welcome to Data Conversations over coffee with myself, Craig Stewart. As you can see, we're not in my office going via Zoom, but we're actually in our wonderful Linden studio here in Johannesburg. It's been so nice to get out. Obviously, Zoom has worked incredibly well, but I just think it's time that we have more personal conversations. Joining me today is Ken Chikwanha from Standard Bank. Ken, how are you doing?
Fantastic. How are you doing, Craig?
Yeah, I'm so good. Thank you.
Great.
Thanks so much for joining us. It's great to see you in
Thank
person.
you for having me. This is lovely. I
Yeah.
love this place. I love the setup.
Such a good setup.
It is.
It's actually something we're going to be using. We're filming new digitally broadcast events, something that's coming out in July. I'm not going to give away too much, but this is really, I think, the future of content.
This is the way to go.
Getting down and sitting together, obviously having a cup of steam coffee as well,
Yeah.
which is my little commercial piece
Your little plug.
that I need to say.
Yeah.
Ken, let's give the audience a little bit of an introduction into you.
Sure. Okay. So I'm Ken Chikwanha. As Craig referred to, I work for one of the local banks here in South Africa, and I look after data governance for one of our key customer segments, which is the consumer and high net worth and business segment. And yeah, I've been with the bank for close to 10 years now. And I'm actually just loving what I'm doing right now.
Yeah.
There's just so much going on in the world of data, just in the world of regulation. It's such an exciting time to just be part of this setup. You know, there's so much to learn, so much to teach other people, and just so much to do.
Yeah.
So I'm actually just enjoying what I'm doing right
Brilliant.
now. I'm
Well, that's
loving
good
it.
to hear.
Yeah.
If you love what you do, you'll never work a day in
That's
life.
absolutely it.
Yeah.
I am. There's just so much to learn.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I've enjoyed our sort of nearly 6 years now in the data analytics space.
You're nearly six
and we've
now.
just seen a massive growth
Yeah.
in everything, all facets of it, right from, and I think the data governance side is always such a key part. AI is on everyone's lips at the moment, ML ops, auto ML, cloud, obviously massive at the moment. But I guess one of the biggest things, and what we really want to dig in today, is really POPIA, GDPR, data privacy and protection, really, to encapsulate everything.
Yep.
And one of the things we want to go through really is regulatory readiness.
Yeah.
I know a lot of people watching are thinking, how are we going to get to this deadline? What does it mean afterwards? How do we get this across the whole of our organization? Obviously, Standard Bank is massive.
Yeah.
How are you going about sort of achieving regulatory readiness in such a massive and complex environment?
It's not a small feat. That's for sure, Craig. I think just the size of the organization, as you point out, actually just it complicates the equation, and but I think the best way to just attack it is basically just to go back to basics. Like, what are the data governance basics? And the data governance basics would be, you need to know what you have.
Yeah.
You need to know, in terms of data, you need to know where it is. I think one of the evolutions right now is because people are starting to work remotely and data is basically just sitting everywhere. We still need to make sure that we have proper oversight of our customers' data, because our customers, that is our biggest currency with our customers. It's trust, right? In the data age, in the digital age. So our customers trust us with their most valuable asset. And do we know where it is? Do we know who can touch it? Do we know who can access it? Do we know who owns it? Like, data sets are so ubiquitous right now, in the sense that there's a lot of intersecting ecosystems, in the sense that you have different organizations sharing data, you have third parties handling and processing your data. And unless you're actually quite clear on what you have, where it is, who owns it, who can touch it, you're actually in for a hiding.
Yeah.
So, like I say, it's understanding those basics, but it's also understanding what the regulator is looking for. And the bulk of that is the regulator focuses on how does this actually impact the man on the street, like the customers. They trust us with their data, so it's up to us to actually make sure that while it's in our custody, it's actually properly protected, and we're not doing things that we're not supposed to be doing with it.
Yeah.
So a lot of our programs are basically just geared around establishing what we have, where it is, what we're actually using it for. Things like consent management. That's at the top of the agenda right now, because a lot of organizations are the rules are changing. The rules of the game are changing drastically. Come the end of June, because now it's going to be enforced and enforceable. So a lot of the companies that are basically just using data for things that weren't agreed on with their customers originally will now find themselves in a spot of bother.
Yeah.
So as an organization, these are things that we're definitely taking seriously and just making sure that we're putting in place the right measures, putting in place the right frameworks to make sure that at a minimum, look, breaches, privacy breaches, those things will happen. I think when you're dealing with such a large organization, such large data sets, it's inevitable.
Yeah.
It's inevitable. But just we're putting in place the different frameworks, like I say, just to make sure that at a minimum, if something does happen, we can actually just respond cohesively as an organization and actually just have an intelligent answer, both for our customers and for the regulator.
Okay. Before we dive into, I guess, some of the specific areas you talk about, like identifying where your data is, you know, the data governance, the rules, etc., that you said, what is the sort of feeling of the organization towards this regulation? You know, from a not your department, obviously your department's taken very seriously. It's something that you need to drive. It's part of your mandate, and I assume executive levels as well, from a liability and sort of corporate governance point of view, but sort of the organization in general. How do they feel about it? How are you educating them and communicating the importance of, you know, this impending regulation, the importance of protecting data, using it correctly, etc.? Because I mean, data literacy in itself is a big job.
Thing. It is,
right?
it's massive.
Yeah. So how do you go now and say, look, data literacy, there's fun things that you can do with this data, but there's a serious side to it as well. Yeah, for sure.
It comes with a massive responsibility. So the conversations have shifted, and the way we've gone about it, basically, Craig, is just reminding the data owners, because the board are the ultimate data owners in the organization. They're ultimately accountable for what happens to the data. So as the legislation comes in, we need to keep reminding all the execs, all the leadership, just these are your responsibilities when it comes to data. Data is not just the function of the data processing or information management department. Data is everyone's business. And as an executive or as a leader in the bank or in a company, you're ultimately accountable for that. When the regulator comes knocking, that trail of crumbs leads back to you. So we've just been quite deliberate about just reminding all our data owners of their actual responsibilities, what they're actually accountable for when it comes to data. So now it's not just, you guys take care of that. This is now, people are actually, they have skin in the game now. They're actually involved in all the conversations. We have different kinds of governance committees around data, where it's not just data people or compliance people or risk people. It's actually business owners leading those conversations. So that's been the biggest thing, because, you know, like you say, it's a mindset that needs to change, you know. And once people actually understand their responsibility, you know, they'll take their people to task.
How do you get cut through in the organization? Because there's so many areas of compliance. People are constantly having to do, you know, some things around HR, workplace ethics, etc. How do you sort of cut through that and say, you know, you need to also do ours. You know, you need to have a look at understanding the usage of data. How do you make it that it's not a pure stick approach, but people actually get involved and they want to be part of it? Because for most people, it's like, oh, another tick box exercise, and I have to go through the learning system and then sort of be compliant.
No, you're spot on. And the way we've actually just tried to incentivize that as well is we let the compliance people, risk people deal with the compliance side of things, but the business needs to know that this is actually a competitive advantage. If I'm a customer and I do business with your organization, I need to know that you're actually properly taking care of my data. And lots of these incidents, data breaches, privacy breaches that keep popping up, they do damage your reputation as an organization. That's bad for business, ultimately. So by actually just showing them in business terms what the impact of actually, compliance is actually a bonus. Compliance with legislation is actually a bonus. But the real value for me is actually in the competitive advantage that you can actually realize from that. Because customers trust you more. You know, if you're in the newspapers every single day, or every other week with an incident, then I'm not going to want to do business with you.
No, for sure.
But I think the more of a handle, the more comfort I can get from you, then the more I want to do business.
And is it about sort of advertising, communicating to customers that you use data ethically and correctly? Or should that just be assumed? And as you say, the trust comes from the fact that you're not constantly in the newspapers or the news for data breaches, etc. How do you sort of communicate that to customers in an authentic way?
Well, look, I think part of it is basically just seeing the evidence, obviously the proof that, okay, there's nothing's happening. But it's also just about the way you respond whenever there's an incident. Because like I say, incidents are almost inevitable. And it's just about being able to respond in a way that gives the customer some comfort that, okay, yes, something went wrong, but at least they know what went wrong. They know which of my data was actually impacted. And they've told me exactly what they're doing about it. And that's how the customer gets comfort from that.
Okay. I want to talk a little bit about, you say, sort of identifying where your data is. I had a guest on the podcast last year, George Ferrican, speaking about dark data, sort of not understanding where all the data is within the organization. I still find that an interesting thing that companies who are quite advanced in their data analytics practices still don't identify where all their data points are within the organization, all their data sources. Obviously, there's quality issues at source. Then there's the usage at source. How do you go about sort of, I guess, identifying that? Are there constantly new sources of data? Is it just sort of a constant program that you need to run to identify these? And once you've identified them, how do you sort of bring them all together in a centralized
place? So look, it's actually just about understanding the entire life cycle. So like you say, the data source is where the data comes into the organization. So ultimately, you need to understand each data flow from the time it enters the organization up until the time it leaves, or it's destroyed, it's archived, or deleted. And part of that is actually putting it in the context of actual business processes. So first customer touch point is at the till, at the counter. Customer gives you their information. Where does it go from there? Where does it go from there? So it's actually just that whole lineage conversation where you actually need to be able to trace exactly all the touch points for the data throughout the time it's actually in your custody within the organization. So I think for a lot of people, it's the best way to do it is actually just in the context of their day-to-day work. So as opposed to trying to come and layer on another discussion around where is the data going, it's actually just follow the business process and just follow where the data is going throughout that.
And how do you then drive quality there? Is it also around letting people know that the better their quality of data that they get to use, the better they'll actually perform in their own roles? Is that how you really go and embed that culture within the organization?
So yes, it's partly with the customers, but it's also with the people in the front line, the people who interact with the customers. They're the ones who need to be educated, just in terms of the minimum requirements that need to be in place for to actually just introduce quality data into the organization. If they're sloppy at that first point of contact, then that's exactly what's going to flow through the rest of the ecosystem in the organization, right? So it is about conscientizing customers, but there's also a big responsibility for our people in the front line who actually collect the data. If it's on the digital channels, then absolutely yes, it's a customer's responsibility to make sure that they input the most the highest quality data they can, because it's in their interests.
All right, let's sort of move a little bit on from that. So one of the things that you were keen to talk about really is the evolution of data governance. Now, data governance, information governance has been around for a long time. Obviously, it's coming to the fore a lot more because of regulation, et cetera. Where do you see data governance going? How is it evolving, and what sort of, I guess, technologies are helping it to evolve within the organization?
So for me, Greg, the backdrop, the original outcomes for data governance don't really change. The principles for data governance don't really change. I think it's just in how they're actually enabled. That's the part that's evolving. So the original outcomes that we spoke about earlier, about understanding what you have, where it is, who can access it, those are the original principles. So what you start changing is, if you're talking about who can access it, then we're evolving the data protection mechanisms. So are we now using an integrated logical access management system, for example, to make sure that only the certain people can access across the different platforms? Are we using things like tokenization to make sure that data is safe at every stage of the life cycle? So that's the part that would evolve in terms of how we actually protect the data, how we source data. We're using artificial intelligence right now to actually source data straight into a business process. Those are the things that will evolve. Data quality, because we're dealing with such massive sets of data, It's also about can you now use artificial intelligence to actually just help you to create better quality data sets and actually to maintain the better quality.
Can we dig into that a little bit more? I think that's really interesting. And really around, I think there's a lot of use cases for AI. There's always that sort of, I guess, misconception as organizations start to get into AI that AI needs to be in everything. But you really need to kind of pick the use case for AI. This is a great one because it brings in, as you said, data quality, brings in the right data sets.
Yes.
Talk to me a little bit about the process of how you've actually put that into place and the benefits that you're seeing.
So with AI, like you say, the benefit of it is when you have the massive sets of data. And obviously being an organization that's 150 plus years old, we do have access to massive sets of data. So to actually make that data work for us, we've had to obviously start turning to artificial intelligence to help us to actually just to mine the data, to analyze the data, and to just help us to create patterns or just identify trends within that data that we can actually start using for as business insights for actually serving our customers better and actually just growing the business. So it's actually just based on leveraging what data sets we have, the massive data sets, and actually just making it more efficient. Essentially, that's the crux of using AI.
Okay.
But like you say, it's not for every single use case. There's some use cases where you can use alternative technologies, whether it's so like for data protection, some of the discovery scans. There's some things that you can't use AI for. But if you need to do user behavior analysis, for example, every organization has gigs upon gigs of user activity logs. If you start using AI to actually analyze that, pick up trends, and then proactively start informing your, with whatever endpoint protection system you're using, for example, then that's actually a very useful use case. But it's actually just about how do we leverage the massive sets of data that we have more efficiently.
Well, you mentioned there endpoint security. You mentioned things like logical access management. I assume identity access management, privileged access management comes into it. And I know we're sort of hopping around a bit, but as things come to me, you must work quite closely with the CISO team within the organization.
Absolutely.
And you've got a fairly advanced one. It's big. It's a big organization, as you say. Do you have any sort of advice, I guess, for companies that may be a bit smaller that don't have a very large CISO team, how they can actually build in sort of, identity access management, privileged access management, all those sorts of things, endpoint security, obviously. Can it be done by the data team, or do they need to sort of bring someone in to help them with that?
Yes, but for me, I think the data teams actually give context to a lot of the IT security or the CISO officers' work. We give the business context to the work they do, because they bring the technology, they tell us how to protect what we have. We need to give them context in terms of this is what we need protected. So for the smaller organizations that can't necessarily invest in the massive teams, the CISOs, I think it's just, you need to prioritize and just take a risk-based approach in the sense that identify your critical business processes, and then identify obviously what threats are pertinent to those processes, and then just focus on managing those risks. Not everyone can set up a CSOC. Some of these things you can actually end up outsourcing, and I think that's generally the trend nowadays, where you actually outsource very key functions which you don't have capacity to do, or you shouldn't really be dabbling in, because your core focus is somewhere else.
For sure.
Yeah.
All right, we've got a few minutes left, Ken. Maybe just to summarize, sort of thinking about organizations out there that are on this sort of journey towards compliance, but just data governance in general and the correct use of data. What are some of the maybe 3 or 4 steps or tips that you could give them that will help them achieve this, in not necessarily in a quick way, because I don't think this is a fast path to compliance, but what's maybe the most efficient and effective way? What would Ken's top tips be for this?
So for me, and I'll keep harping on you need to know what you have. I think it's key to just create an inventory of what data you actually hold within the organization and with the third parties as well, because we outsource. We need to understand what our third parties are actually holding on our behalf. So understand what you have, create that inventory of data assets. Obviously understand where it is. If it's in the cloud, you need to make sure that obviously those requisite controls and so on are in place, and you have the requisite arrangements with your providers. So understand what you have, where it is, understand logical access we speak about. Those are more of the detailed things. But I think a big thing that we normally overlook is, and it's something you touched on earlier, is just changing the culture.
Yeah.
Because I think once you change the culture of data handling in the organization, you change the game, literally.
Yeah.
Because once everyone knows what their responsibilities are and what's the expectation in terms of how they need to be handling customer data responsibly, that completely just changes things. You can't keep layering on technology. That's my thing. You can't. You can buy all the fanciest tools in the world, but all you're doing is just you're solving for a broken culture.
Okay.
And you can't actually do that. So change the culture first, and then layer on your technology, because now your technology is working. You're solving for the right thing, as opposed to trying to solve for poor or bad behavior using technology, which is not sustainable.
Yeah. So it's always about focusing on that people, process, and technology in that order.
Yeah, it's people, process, and then technology.
Okay.
100% agree.
Perfect. And one of the things I've been asking every guest on the show this year, because I want to build up, I guess, a bank of these and see where the commonalities are.
Yeah.
What would you say are, in your opinion, the sort of top 2 or 3 trends in data analytics for 2021? Doesn't necessarily have to just be data protection, just things that you see are emerging technologies or emerging sort of new ways of working with data. What would you say you see on the horizon?
So for analytics, it's definitely, like you say, the use of AI is that's a must-have. As the data sets explode, then AI in analytics is a must-have. Obviously, being on the side that I work on, user behavior analytics is something that's actually key as well, because it helps to drive a lot of changes in the organization, not just in user behavior, but in terms of the investments that we make as well in some of the data protection or data management technology. So that's another key use of analytics as well. And yeah, I think for me those are the main 2. I think I'll be scratching around a bit if I. Those are the main things that I'll be focusing on right now.
Great stuff. Ken, thank you so much for joining us. It's been really good.
Pleasure.
First guest in the new studio setup.
Nice.
It's worked out really well.
It's nice.
I do love the
the
way
setup.
It's set up.
I love the setup. Yeah,
absolutely.
It feels like you're at home.
Yeah, exactly. This is the most comfortable chair.
Yeah, it is.
Luckily, I don't have to get out of it. I've actually, after this, Mark Nasila, the Chief Analytics Officer from FNB, is going to be joining me. I'll have to have another cup of coffee. So if I start shaking, and when you see the Mark Nasila episode, you'll know why. But we'll actually be talking about the use of data for good, which is a nice change of pace.
That's awesome.
Ken, all the best.
Thank you so much, Greg.